好，歡迎各位中聯辦啦，東區警署重案組第2特別小隊啦，同埋呢一個
南京公安局嘅朋友咧，
仲有呢一個香港嘅資訊科技總監辦公室咧，就收睇政事協商會議嘅。
冇錯啦，我哋今日呢一個題目咧都係唔關你哋事嘅。
Yeah, sorry about it. Our topic is gonna bore you all, and we are going to do our show in English. So if you're tired enough to censor me, just turn off your camera and go home and take a rest.
Or if you don't know English, you can go home as well.
Wait for yes, yeah, we're pretty free actually to talk about this. So what we are going to do today is to talk about a case in Singapore, which a 19-year-old man actually being ruled by the court to be executed because of the so-called smuggling, drugs trafficking issue. And so that's why we've brought out his representative, Mr. Ravi, right here. And we've got Amnesty International, Hong Kong's representative as well, Len Dong. Right? So maybe people like in Hong Kong or just in Taiwan or wherever else in Chinese communities not really actually familiar with the case. Would you like to explain in brief, or any of you could be, like what Yong Vui Kong's case is?
Are we going to talk in Chinese or not?
No.
No. Okay. I think Mr. Ravi can just briefly describe the case where Yong Vui Kong is being through.
Okay, Yong Vui Kong was 19 years old at the time when he was caught for drug trafficking in Singapore, and he had a very, very difficult childhood because he is, in Malaysia, that's West Malaysia and East Malaysia. He comes from Sabah.
Yeah.
Yes, and he comes from a family of 7, 3 brothers, 3 sisters. Among the guys, he's one of the youngest.
So it's big family.
Yes, and the thing is that the mother was only earning like 200 ringgit, which is very, very little as a dishwasher. And also she was married into a family where she was treated as a slave in a plantation. So the mother didn't have the time to look after him, and the parents were going through divorce, and he ended up in Malaysia. I mean, as in Malaysia, as in KL, the Penang, and all these places. So since he was 10, he was already scattered all over Malaysia, trying to struggle to make a living and stuff like that. And he got involved in this drug syndicates. And at first he was selling VCD, and they said, look, you go and sell drugs, you bring this to Singapore. He was not sure about this at all. So he ended up having to traffic drugs, and he didn't know that it will be death sentence that's looming large around his neck. And in Singapore, the law is so serious, so strict. It's in fact, Singapore and Malaysia are the 2 countries in Asia, only the 2 countries in Asia, which have what we call the mandatory death sentence. The mandatory death sentence meaning the courts don't have the powers to actually look into the individual circumstances of the person, and that is what we describe as cruel and unusual punishment. Yes.
And so when he was trying to so-called smuggling or bringing that heroin to Singapore, he actually don't know what the package inside is, right?
Yes, he didn't know.
So he's just being instructed to do so.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's one of the tragedies about
Yes.
it. So after he has realized that kind of thing, seems like Malaysian government initially want to do nothing about it, right? But why has it come up with right now suspension of this execution process?
You mean Singapore?
The
Malaysian government.
The Malaysian government is just initially they are reluctant
Yes.
to this case, but why? I would say
Actually,
because it's citizens of Malaysia.
Right. Yes. In Singapore, and Amnesty International have always put the spotlight on Singapore having one of the highest executions in the world per capita population. In fact, in 2004, Singapore had the highest. Per capita. And now I'm not sure what is the latest, but it's still one of the highest in the world. Now the thing is that first, In Yong Vui Kong's case itself, he was sentenced to death. The case was over. Just 2 days before, his mother is also suffers from psychological mental problem. Just 2 days before he was supposed to be hanged. He was supposed to be hanged on the 4th of December 2009. In fact, a letter to prepare for his funeral was already given. The sister has already bought the funeral clothes for the brother. The younger sister, Yong Vui Kong, has already bought the funeral clothes. It was very sad. That was the last. I was not the initial lawyer who initially was involved. So last minute, so 2 days before, she came and I applied. When I came on board, I applied for a stay of execution and argued against the mandatory death sentence in Singapore. The law being cruel and unusual punishment is it violates constitutional law. Basically, that was the position I took. Now, after that, just before the Court of Appeal gave its judgment in May last year, in that same week, the Minister of Law of Singapore, the Minister of Law made a comment to a question by a constituent, one of the constituencies in Singapore. He gave a talk. And the constituent was very concerned about the judgment coming this week as to whether this is as if it's going to bring a lot of drugs in Singapore, just because the court, rules otherwise. He was very concerned. The law minister mentioned Yong Vui Kong's name, that if Yong Vui Kong spared the death penalty, others might use just, a young boy like that as an example. So I took out 2 applications in court. One is the fact that the law minister has prejudged because after the court rule, we still have the final chance, which is the president's clemency petition can be filed. Now, also another ground I challenged also is that the government of Singapore, the representative in court, the Attorney General, had submitted that the Singapore president does not have the power to grant clemency, which is also shocking because it's called presidential clemency process, and the president don't have the power. So these are the 2 grounds of challenge currently it's under. So until the court delivers its judgment, all executions for the last 1 year have I understand that no executions have taken place, except last week I was told that that's one person who has been executed. I don't know why. I have to go and check this. But anyway, insofar as Yong Vui Kong is concerned, we are waiting for the judgment. So anytime this judgment can come out. Now, to your question as to how the Malaysian government got involved, because of the law minister's comments, which actually it's Singapore government is making the decision at the end of the day on clemency, right? That's what the government says. It's not the president. It's even worse. So therefore, I told the Malaysian government, look, I used the Malaysian High Commission to speak to the Malaysian Foreign Affairs Ministry to tell the Malaysian government, look, you should be interested. Your citizen is at stake. You should file a complaint to the International Court of Justice and protect the rights of your citizens. They were not bothered. After that, I went to Malaysia. I tried to find the legal network to speak. I found the lawyers network there, the Malaysian Bar Council. They gave me then Amnesty International of Malaysia. We had a press conference to speak. And I tried to highlight the matter. After which, I tried to go legally. It didn't go well. They were ignoring me. They were not paying attention. After that, I used a political card. I went to the parliament together with another MP, Tian Chua. And then there's another, his party and all that. They tried to pass an emergency motion for the Malaysian government to intervene, which got dismissed. Then we had a press conference. And then in the press conference, I highlighted to the press that, look, I am a Singaporean. Irregardless of any race or religion. I'm shocked when I came to Malaysia. That's Malay supporting Malays, Chinese support Chinese, and Indian support Indian. And Yong Vui Kong is from a Chinese background. He's a minority. And from Sabah, he's very poor. People think that, all Chinese are rich and stuff like that,
But that's not the case.
That's not the case. And the Malaysian Chinese from West Malaysia who are richer, they also discriminate against the poorer Chinese in Sabah. They also don't care because the East Malaysians get the lower end, especially the Chinese community in Sabah. And the Malaysian government had in the past, in fact, in my press conference, I highlighted this, that a Malay girl who was 25, about mid-20s, I think, she was caught for trafficking 3 kilogram of heroin. To be precise, it's 2.9 kilo in China. And she was sentenced to death in China. The Malaysian government, as in the UMNO and another opposition, both the opposition and the government came together to appeal. Both one is a PAS, it's a Islam party, another Malay UMNO. They come together and appeal to the Chinese government and got the Chinese government to commute the sentence to life imprisonment. And Yong Vui Kong is only trafficked 47 grams. And that Malay girl trafficked 2.9 kilogram. My question is, why didn't the Malaysian government do the same for him? All the more he was 19 and as opposed to this girl, and Singapore is so close, and China is like a big emperor, you know, and yet Chinese government actually reduced it to life imprisonment. So that was the thing I highlighted. I found it unacceptable that the Malaysian government should, think race as a criteria to intervene, but rather as a matter of principle, for the citizen they should intervene. That was the noise I created. The foreign minister then, who also comes from Sabah,
so ironic.
Yes. And he's very interested. We are very happy that he got involved. And the Malaysian government finally appealed to the Singapore government.
But right beforehand, why did the parliament just not trying to act together? As you said, they have ruled out or vetoed or dismissed the act to save or to have a statement to save Yong Vui Kong.
I think that emergency motions are not usually easy to get attention because there are so many cases in priority. But the fact is that the fact is that initially it was so difficult because they were not interested.
Yeah.
You know.
No medias.
No, not much media.
And the public did not support them. Did not have a big voice there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to go back a little bit and talk about why Mr. Ravi is here, because we're having a press conference on Monday, and we're inviting Mr. Ravi to be here because he's one of the probably the most important human rights lawyer in Singapore, and we would like to have him to talk about the situation in Singapore.
Yeah, how many human rights lawyers actually?
Let's talk about this because it's really interesting to me.
In Singapore.
What's the situation?
Because we all know that, from textbook, Singapore is an authoritarian state. And an oppressing state. And People's Action Party just ruled everything. Full stop.
From our textbooks.
From our textbooks.
Your textbooks are perfectly correct. And I don't wish to propose any amendments to your textbook. I have actually, the human rights chair was empty in Singapore. It was something that nobody wants to take. I quickly took it, So
there's a post called the Human Rights Committee. Is there
no such thing. Anyway, it was only in 2003 when I was actually doing more corporate litigation work, and which was earning a lot of money in law. And then when one Malaysian boy was supposed to be hanged, in 2003, that's how I got involved in death penalty cases, and from then I launched a campaign against death penalty and there were a different group of people, of course, came together to help me, as well as the campaign has actually progressed, of course, with Amnesty International support as well. To answer the question directly, there are no other human rights lawyers doing similar work like what I do. So I'm struggling alone.
Why is that having such a situation in Singapore?
Just fear. And lawyers don't want to rock the boat. And the Law Society of Singapore, there's even a law saying that the Law Society actually cannot comment on public legislation unless it's invited to do so. Can you imagine the Law Society cannot? They passed a law muzzling the Law Society to speak up when Law Society is the one which should be speaking up on civil liberties and rights. So it's that bad. And the lawyers in Singapore generally, they're afraid as well, because the question is, if they do something, what's going to happen to their family, whose Singaporeans are not going to actually help them? Nobody is going to sponsor them. So this is the question, why should they actually risk themselves? Yes.
So are you being threatened or something in the course of about 8 years, right? 2003 until now?
Yes, as I'm speaking to you, I already a few weeks ago, I was under police investigation for some remarks I made in court. That's the reason why I'm in Hong Kong as well, because here there's Martin Lee and Albert Ho. They're like my mentors. So, I just get some support, regional support like this. And it's very tough in Singapore, I must say, because there are two things. One is there are no organizations to support this kind of human rights work. There's no legal aid. So I have to sponsor the work myself, like Yong Vui Kong's case and all that. I'm happy to do. But it is long drawn process. It affects you psychologically as well. It's draining. as well, and you got to think of counseling the family. Of course, there are activists who have come forward, and they've done great work. The online media like the Online Citizen, the Singapore Anti-Death Penalty Committee, all these people have come forward. It's very, very, very encouraging right now. But there are also other work that I'm doing as well. Like a 377A challenge, it's against gay sex, that law, and Internal Security Act, some abuses before, and Alan Shadrake's case, all these things. All this generally are pro bono work. So it's tough to manage a practice like this. You got to sleep.
Yeah. I'm interested. Well, there must be many Yong Vui Kongs across the years. Who do they turn to when there's so few people like you in Singapore?
Yeah.
Who do they turn to?
Well, they can only turn to God, I guess.
Oh,
yes. That's very
that's
sad.
That's so bad. Come on.
Yeah.
But like from 2003, since you have been involved, how would like the Singaporean view on execution that matter? Like their general views whether that is acceptable even like in general terms, or that is acceptable to do like to on youth even under like 21, right, for the age of maturity.
To answer this question, you might want to raise that Hong Kong issue.
Well, first of all, I want to bring up an internet poll that's printed in Alan Shadrake's book,
right.
Which you may want to have a close up later on. It's called Once a Jolly Hangman. It's a really great book to look at if you are interested in DP cases, death penalty. That was a internet poll saying that of 2,899 respondents, 55% Singaporeans supported capital punishment as it helps keep the crime rate down. That's what it says. Over 50% people supported DP in Singapore.
Oh man.
That's what it says here. It's right here. Only 14% opposed the death penalty, while 2% were unsure.
Okay, so majority of them thinks it works, but actually putting criminals in jail already has that deterrent effect, right? I don't know why in that an affluent society could still tolerate this or still disrespect to human lives.
Well, from our stance, from Amnesty's stance, we have a lot of reasons to oppose DP, but there's one major reason, except everyone agrees, which DP it's anti-human rights. It's the one thing that we feel the strongest about DP is that it cannot be undone. Once it's done, it cannot be undone. So if Yong Vui Kong one day is executed, and if one day that proves that he's innocent, he's already dead. So we cannot revise and revisit the case anymore. And that's the saddest part of DP that we feel.
So you guys have been trying to advocate this kind of messages across the nation or even in Malaysia, somewhere like that. But hasn't it changed the perception?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because we have a lot of supporters as well as we have a lot of people to lobby about. In Singapore, it's a hard case because people tend to want to live in a safe state. And they think having DP makes a very safe country or state in Singapore, which the statistics have already proved that crime rate has nothing to do with execution.
Yeah, because so ironically, because safe, but risking your life or even doing anything else, any crimes, even being.
But something is really interesting about Yong Vui Kong case. If you are nearby a computer, which of course you are, there is one clip on Al Jazeera which is really
23-minute documentary.
Yeah, about Yong Vui Kong. You should see it. And the interesting about Yong Vui Kong's case is, seems like the system is not punishing the big boss behind Yong Vui Kong. We are punishing the one who's the helpless boy, who are not educated, who are not earning big money, from doing that drug trafficking case.
And even not tasting anything inside, no money to buy the thing he carried.
Well, in my opinion, he's the least candidate who should be punished and even executed.
In fact, what you're saying is also correct, because his boss, the guy who actually used all these people, young people and so on and so forth, he's caught. But he is kept under the, what we call the criminal law temporary provisions, which is when they don't really have evidence against you, they will keep you under that, like for a few years. And but he's kept under that, but he's not given death penalty. Not that I'm saying that he should be given death penalty, because I'm totally opposed. But the unfairness of the thing is that the police have caught him, and he had huge money with him, and he was also caught, I was told. So Yong Vui Kong is very angry. In fact, he was telling me that, you know, look, I'm here, I'm going to be executed. What about this man? In fact, he didn't talk about this man at all until he was sentenced to death. And then the police, based on the information from what I gather, they've got this man. But this guy is going to be released a few years later after Yong Vui Kong is executed.
But where has his boss being like caught? In Singapore or Malaysia?
I think he's caught. I think he had been caught in Malaysia. I'm not sure about these details, you know, because it's very difficult to get information about this.
But his boss is being caught by administrative procedure.
So basically, Singapore police have kept him now, you know, and he's not charged in court because they don't have any evidence against him. Because and Singapore has another law. I'm not sure whether you have this. The law was actually for triad societies. And you know, you can keep them without any trial.
Without any trial, no bail, that kind of thing.
No. Of course, they can actually deny bail, but you know, can you keep a person for a number of years without any trial here in Hong Kong?
We don't have such law.
Yeah, this law was introduced in I think it was in the late 50s or early 60s, because secret societies are difficult to monitor and people don't want to give evidence against them. That was the reason why it was brought. But it's still there. So Yong Vui Kong's this boss is there now. So you know, how would he feel when he's going to be executed and this guy is there and is going to be only released, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, Nandong has given a point: illiteracy. So Yong Vui Kong could be considered as illiterate, right?
Yes.
But why could it not become a defending reasons for that?
Sorry?
To defend himself with he's illiterate. Because it's mandatory. If he carries for a certain amount of drugs, it's mandatory, right?
Yes. I think you must remember that there are two things here, you know. One is mandatory death sentence and the other thing is death sentence. In Singapore, it's, you know, many countries in Asia have death penalty. Not many, I mean, quite a number of countries. Quite a few countries have death penalty.
Taiwan.
But yes. But all these countries, yes. But all these countries don't have one thing which Singapore has, which is mandatory death sentence. That is the harshest form of punishment. Even India, which had this, but the courts in India have declared it as unconstitutional to not to allow the judges, because mitigation is part of the criminal process before you are sentenced. You know, if you are sentenced for even a small offense, you know, spitting is an offense in Singapore. To spit, you know, chewing gum. Even that you can actually plead to the court why you should not be sentenced to this number of years and so on and so forth, or fine. But for death penalty, which is irreversible, you're going to go and there's no turning back. You don't have, the courts cannot hear. It's cruel because the person cannot convince the court. I mean, the person is not allowed to convince the court why he should not be executed. That is the difference. That's what we are fighting. Not even death penalty.
Yeah, even though no room to be argued on court.
Yes, that itself, I mean, there are a lot of this, Japan and Taiwan, all have death penalty, but they don't have mandatory death penalty, which is the worst form of uncivilized law that we have. In fact, Indian courts criticized this in 1981 when this, you know, because Hong Kong and Singapore, we all got the law from India. It's a crown colony, you know. So, you know, they said that this is the lawless law of the military regimes. You know, not to allow judges. So the judges' hands are tied. That's the difficult part we have, you see.
Yep. And this one little, very short recap of what we have talked about. There was a recent report by Amnesty saying that usually people who are less educated, they are more vulnerable than the average people to have been executed. So which says people who are less educated will be penalized, but
severely.
But of course, they may not be the one who actually have to suffer of the death penalty.
Yeah, including an 18-year-old Hong Kong girl. Do you know that was hanged in Singapore in 1995? There's a book.
Right.
18 years old.
Yeah, we know that case. Okay, we'll back to you all in 5 minutes. Let's take a break and then watch out the videos I've just got you all about Yong Vui Kong's case as well.
Can we ask the commissioner to come out and visit? Because we want to hand over outside. Yeah, hand over outside. Yeah. I can't hear you. Can we have a representative? No, represent. Yeah, actually we have few MPs. Few of us only. Yeah. S. Manikewan sekarang MP Kappa, and then Manongaran. Telur Intan. Again, the lawyers.
Handed over a memorandum to the Singapore government protesting the denial of due process to Yong Vui Kong and calling for his life to be spared. Basically, we want the Singapore government to give the response as to this matter because it's very urgent. Somebody's life is going to be lost in a matter of time, and they're not doing anything so far. We have come to this commission, I think 2 weeks back, to relate to the same problem where a young Malaysian who was hanged based on the testimony of a corrupt police officer. So we are saying to the Singapore government to actually look into this matter. This is not just about anything that is not important to them, because this is about a matter of human lives. It's about human rights, fundamental liberties, and the right for Yong Vui Kong to ask for clemency, because in this case it's very clear that the government of Singapore is not interested whatsoever to give him this due process as to his clemency petition, because they have prejudicially made a statement denying this right without even having him to be heard before the court. So we are protesting against this blatant violation of human rights and due process as enshrined in their own constitution. And we are asking the Singapore government to be answerable for this, because they are going to violate a human right of a person who has a very repressive and also abused childhood, who got trapped in this whole scenario. And we are asking them to show some compassion as to their own application of the law and also to the harsh implementation of their drugs laws. And right now, what we are asking is that he is to be given the due process that he is entitled to under the law, as we need to spare his life because he's a human being. And we're talking about his fundamental rights and liberties right here.
Today, actually, we came a small group. If they hang Yong, I will bring a coffin box here in front here. I warn Singapore government again. If they hang him this time, we will bring a coffin box here. We are serious to the Singapore government. Today, a small group we came here. A small group, and definitely we're going to protest a bigger group here if they hang Yong. I warn Singapore government. And also, again, I'm shameful for the minister. The minister, Hanifa, today with a statement. I think he should put more pressure against the Singapore government. Don't hang a young 18-year-old. Bagi dia peluang, give him a chance. We are going all out this time. If they hang, we will come back here with a bigger group, and we'll bring a coffin box here. You hang him, this is not one. I think another guy was hanged before this. We are serious this time.
We are very disappointed that despite the MP making an appointment with the High Commissioner this morning, he has avoided meeting us. So I think Singapore is using its usual tactics of trying to avoid people who are coming for justice. In their country, they do the same thing. No Singaporean can even gather like this in Singapore. And this killing attempted, or rather impending doom that Yong is facing is tied into the repressive policies that the state of Singapore enforces not just on foreigners but on its own people. This is a dictatorial state. And there is an ancient saying that says, you save one life, you save the whole world. And we are asking Singapore to perform that supreme act of mercy and show the world that they are not oppressors, that they respect the value of life. It will be a life-affirming act on the part of Singapore. This is not an ordinary petition we have given. We are asking, we are pleading for the life of a human being. This is unique. And in this country, I think people have never come out asking for our national who has been put on death row to be spared, because the circumstances are truly extenuating. Apart from the fact that the death penalty is dangerous and we are against it, these circumstances are extenuating. Now, I want to finish by saying that we will be back. If Singapore maintains its stubborn course, we will be back. We will come again on a weekend. We will come with larger numbers. We will carry out all-night vigils in front of this place in order to show the disapproval and disgust of the people of Malaysia against what is being done to a citizen of Malaysia in Singapore. Because legally what they are doing to him is wrong. Okay? The Singapore court has already said that the president has no powers of pardon. The cabinet has already said that they will not pardon Yong. Therefore, Yong's legal process has been stopped. In other words, the execution will be illegal. Singapore is going to execute a Malaysian citizen illegally. What is the Malaysian government doing? It is keeping quiet. The foreign minister should quit. Hanifa should quit, because he is not taking up the cause of a Malaysian who is about to be executed illegally. What is the government doing? The government claims to be our government. The Malaysian government claims to do such great things for the people of this country, but it cannot stand up for one Malaysian citizen in trouble overseas. Now, can Malaysians then rely on the Malaysian government if they are in trouble overseas? Can Malaysians ever rely on the Malaysian government to help them? The answer is no, no, no. And this is a warning to the Malaysian government also. Do not stand by. Do not anger the sense of justice of the Malaysian people. We will strike back by using all legal means at our disposal, including the ballot box, if Malaysia will not move to save this young boy.
Okay, so
Malaysia is a nicer place than Singapore.
Yes, of course.
Okay, back to us, the Political Affairs Consultation Conference.
Yes, this is our program, our show name.
Well, we're just trying to prank on CPPCC's name, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference.
Propaganda.
Yeah, so we're on parody. Our show's name is on parody.
Okay.
Anyway, so you guys have just seen the protest in Malaysia. Is it in Kuala Lumpur, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a bunch of lawyers come from different races, like from Malays, Indians, and Chinese as well, act together to protest on the Malaysian government's reluctance towards Yong Vui Kong's case in Singapore as well.
Yes.
Yep. So it's quite interesting to know that the Amnesty International or the civil society in Singapore have been trying to do like massive campaigns on Yong Vui Kong's case, including like give life a second chance. But can you like tell us more about like how would it be like started or initiated? Where's the point
in Singapore? This place?
Yeah.
Well, I hope people are on the internet, because we tend to do a lot of internet campaigning through Singaporeans, because it's not pretty confident or safe to talk about this in Singapore, I guess. Not really.
Well, you don't have this kind of internet studios, I guess.
Yeah, so we rely on the internet. So we have all our cases printed on our website, official website. So we hopefully will get these to the people in Singapore. We have Facebook pages, forums, and videos. So hopefully get these to the people in Singapore. But the most important thing about against or supporting DP is you have to know why you're supporting or rejecting or whatever. You have to know. You have to know one thing is what is above the value of a human life. What is above the value of that? If there's nothing above the value of a human's life, then this is the highest point you should defend. So we will be against death penalty because we should give people a chance. Or if you think what is the most harsh punishment, some people would say this is death penalty. Some people would say life imprisonment, right? So which way are you in? What do you think? This is the most important thing we want people to think about.
So that's the message you're trying to promote.
Always, as always.
Yes. In Amnesty International.
And also Amnesty International is not in Singapore, it's in Malaysia. So they're not even allowed to have any offices in Singapore. Yeah. And Singapore government, the minute, in fact, recently there's a local online media, which is called the Online Citizen, that used to do a lot of campaign for Yong Vui Kong as well. The Singapore government declared them as a political organization. So any organization, any NGO that becomes vocal, and they will declare it as a political organization or it's like a political party at the end of the day. It's like,
and then what will be the result?
And so that as a result, they can't get funding from overseas. So it's one way to just cripple you, and frighten you.
Yeah, just an administrative convenience to kill you all, as always. Yeah. But how frequent do you meet Yong Vui Kong right now?
I at least once a month I meet him. In fact, I was supposed to meet him before I came here. I scheduled one appointment. In fact, I'm going to meet him as in the week, the coming week actually. Yeah.
So how's him right now? Like in a prison, separate, in a separate cell, that kind of thing?
Yes. Yong Vui Kong actually, he was illiterate and he wanted to really study. In fact, I went to, in Al Jazeera's documentary, you will see that I went to investigate with the help of course, activists and filmmakers, his background. And I just took all his books. In fact, his mother, who's mentally challenged, she kept all this book in, it's a real deep end village. There's a buffalo, in fact, outside the house. It's really deep end of Sabah. It's one end of a forest. In fact, his house is locked. And the mother kept all his books, all his school books, when he was like primary 3, primary 4, when he was 8, 9 years old. And I saw each book. In fact, his highest level was like, I think, primary 4. And he was like very interested in mathematics. His Chinese language was very poor. But now, in fact, his mother also was impressed. In the prison, he studied his Chinese, he's reading Malay, and his English. At first, I used to speak a little bit Hokkien, Fujian. I speak a little bit. Hokkien. And then Malay and Chinese, English, all combined together. It's to speak to him. And he's over this 1 year, he can read, write, he can speak well. He wants to, actually, he's almost like a Buddhist monk, about his story. He's into meditation. 4 a.m. he wakes up, he meditates the whole day. And in fact, he collects all the biscuits. He doesn't take tea. His biscuits, he just shares with other inmates. And he's always meditating. Yeah.
What you have just said is very interesting, because I'm sure some people are not really interested in Yang, whether he or not become a Buddhist or become a better person. Some people just want to punish him one time, just kill him. That's all. Yeah. They're not interested in improving a person or to bring him out of that jail and be a good citizen. Some people just not interested. Yeah. Right? They just want safe country, some safe state. So just kill any prisoner, any criminal.
Yeah. Even the one who has intention to improve or make another chance. As always.
Yeah, the thing is that, even during the court challenge that I did, it's really illogical, because the state has to prove in court actually that death sentence or the mandatory death sentence reduces crime or whatever. No statistics in Singapore. The state doesn't even prove in court. In fact, Jeffrey Fagan, a leading expert on this, he did an article, I think it was March last year, 2010. It's called A Tale of Two Cities, Tale of Two Cities, comparing Hong Kong and Singapore. And Hong Kong abolished death penalty in 1966. Yeah. And until now, there's no major crime is going up or anything of that sort. And your next door is China, and there's 1.3 billion population. there's so much of cross-border interactions and so on. And Singapore is so isolated and so safe. And yet, there's no proof that it has, and the state doesn't bother. So it's very, very difficult to sustain an illogical, not only is illogical, it's like what he has just told, Don has said, it's completely, it lacks compassionate understanding of the problem, the social ill. And most of these people are young people. And death penalty is applied against the most disadvantaged section of the society. The poorest of the poor are always, the majority of them are them. And young people in particular. I'm not saying that the older people should not be given a chance, but these people must have a chance to actually look like Yong Vui Kong. He wants to, in fact, have him as an example for others, to see that he has become a Buddhist. He's like, in fact, he's even doing counseling for other inmates, and even some of the prison officers are like, when I talk to them, they can't even digest the fact that this boy is going to be killed and crushed to death without any hope. Because, and this reflects such, this whole process just shows how inhumane the section of Singapore has become.
And we must understand that if one person commits a crime, it doesn't mean that he's an evil guy. Yeah. He must have gotten into the wrong path. So what's the reason behind that is the most important thing we should investigate, not just to punish that person and put him into jail and just kill him.
Well, even in normal, or let's say not so normal, but the common law procedures, they would, when they're like going to decide, or the judge going to think of whether that guy should be punished in what way, they would just consider the tendency of the defendant being committed to the same crime again. But in your case, it is mandatory.
Yes.
So no chance.
No chance.
No chance to talk about this.
I would like to ask a question, because when you talk about mandatory death penalty and death penalty, are there two death penalties in Singapore? It is just the mandatory death penalty.
Mandatory death penalty. The thing is that in the whole of Asia, right?
Yep.
Other countries like Japan and Taiwan, for example, they have death penalty.
Yep.
That of course, we also are opposed, but we can understand where they're coming from. But what is classified as cruel and inhumane punishment and sentence is mandatory death sentence. Means the court, out of all places, the court cannot look at Yong Vui Kong, you are sentenced to death now. But now tell me your background. Tell us how you got involved. And Yong Vui Kong cannot even speak to the court. The minute you are 15 grams of heroin, and that's it, you're sentenced. We are not interested. You are you are hanged. So it's called automatic, robotic kind of reactionary approach, you see.
Which the system only sees the material proof that's the highest of the all proofs, right? So once it sees 15 grams, is this 15 grams? 15 grams, and that means you're going to die.
Yeah.
Nothing else counts. And that's the worst part of the...
Yeah, and 14.99, then it begs the question, 14.99, 0.1 gram is the difference between life and death.
So, have there ever been such case before in Singapore, 4.99?
Well, there are cases where the drugs was like, for example, where the limit of the drug was reduced to 14.99 and were let off to life imprisonment. The prosecution has done that. But it's very unfair, because how do you choose these people? In fact, some of them, quite a number of them are actually much, much older than Yong Vui Kong, a 29-year-old guy or 30. Their limit have been reduced. And
what about a frequent smuggler who always
carries
say 2.9 grams to Singapore? What about it, right?
Yeah, but if he's caught, he will be sentenced to life imprisonment. Okay. He cannot come out anyway.
Right. But it won't be killed.
But he won't be killed. That's a point also as well. Yeah. But the thing is that first-time offender. The point about mitigation, the point about giving judges some room, to look into the circumstances. Now in India, the parliament didn't change this. The courts struck down this mandatory death sentence. Yeah. In America, in 1976, also the US Supreme Court also struck down, because Parliament never did this. So that's the reason why I was inspired by all this, and I challenged it in Singapore. that the courts actually should declare this as unconstitutional because it deprives the man of his life on a fundamental principle, denying one the right to mitigate.
Yeah. No, a question for you.
Yes.
As you said before, that like half of the Singaporeans support the DP, and then like 40% of them don't. Well, we know from textbook, Singapore is a so-called multi-ethnic with a majority Chinese there, and somehow there might be or possibly race discrimination between different races. Is there any other case to make such perception that people just try to penalize or having a perception on non-Asian, non-Chinese?
Well, I don't think that's a reason. But one thing that you have pointed out is very legitimate. Is Chinese always have a thinking that if you kill someone, you have to be killed. So it sets a life for a life, an eye for an eye, right? So if Singapore is a place that's filled up by Chinese, that 55% is not a surprise to me because they always have this kind of feeling. But what surprises me and what disturbs me is it's live. So I'm not sure about what law students in Singapore would talk about this when they study this, like DP in university.
Yes.
But in the public space or in as a society, DP as a public topic, I wonder how it will be discussed. I wonder how it will be discussed.
Are there any discussion in the Singaporean public or Singaporean?
And I wonder the quality of the discussion.
Yeah. Are there any discussion there?
Yeah,
it's a very good, very, very important and interesting question as well. There have been only recent discussions in actually the online media, and it's a very small number of people. The state confuses the people constantly because they don't tell the people about mandatory death sentence. People don't understand.
Because it's really like a law thing.
Yeah, it's a law thing.
Regular people just don't understand.
Don't understand what is mandatory. What is death penalty? People don't care. Okay, they'll just say, "Oh, do you agree with death penalty?"
People get killed. That's fine.
That's it. Yeah. But if really people understand that the judges cannot look into the circumstances, I'm sure Singaporeans, regardless of whatever background or ethnic background they are, they will oppose because it's unfair. But the problem is that there's such a lack of political education or social education about these issues in Singapore. The state media is all controlled. There's not even one paper in Singapore which is independent. Everything is government controlled. So there's completely no voice at all. Yeah. And only the online media is struggling, but it's a very small group. And in fact, the online media have actually done some surveys of university students who, some of them have spoken up. And law school, of course, there are professors writing good articles against this, but it's all articles. It's law students are just examining these topics in examinations.
In Ivory Tower, not taking into real action.
Not taking real action.
The public can never understand what they're talking about.
Yeah. And of course, public don't understand, but the government actively, even they understand, the government will try to confuse them further. Make sure that they don't understand.
How?
Yeah, I mean, they will just ask questions which is about death penalty.
Do you support death penalty?
Yes.
Opinion poll.
Yeah, exactly. But, even they have done that in the mainstream papers, but they don't explain to the people, do you support mandatory death sentence? Do you support the fact that the judges don't have the power to look into the circumstances of the individual? These questions have not been raised.
How did internet is all about young people to be interact on or most approachable media for youth. But in your case, seems like because in Hong Kong we have many protests, movements, organized by post-80 groups are steered or being circulated on the internet, on Facebook, Twitter, etc.
And even for Africa.
Or even for Africa. But why spreading the case of Yong Vui Kong's case or talking about DP or advocating people against DP in Singapore, could it actually happen that youth could get the message and get the campaign down?
I think it really comes down to the point where young people, are they really opened up? Are they really reading newspapers? Not only Singaporean newspapers. Are they reading New York Times? Are they reading CNN.com? Are they reading BBC? We are pushing as Amnesty International internationally, we're pushing reporters, journalists, lobbyists, politicians, lawyers to write articles for us, to lobby for us, to push this issue to an international level so that those forces come back to Singapore to affect the scene, to push the issue. That's how they do things.
You see, I think, that the point that you're mentioning is again important. People don't understand, especially in the region, Asia. Singapore is a very powerful country in the sense that the democracy, now we have in ASEAN Human Rights Commission is trying to be formed. In fact, it's formed. The country we know as Singapore is actually always trying to find its ways to slow down the process. In fact, Lee Kuan Yew was speaking about, when the Tiananmen disaster happened in 1987, he was supporting the Chinese government. 1989, he was supporting why what China did was correct, to crush all the students and so on and so forth. So what I mean is that I think it's important that the process, in fact, China is making progress much more than even Singapore. Not that at least China says that I'm a communist country, we are not free, we are authoritarian, and we will do. But Singapore portrays itself as modern, transparent, open, Western. We have elections. Then you do this kind of things. And then it slows down the process. Because like Thailand, for example, is in a mess because there was the Singapore's involvement as well into the telecommunications, that Shencorp deal and all that. So the thing is that ASEAN is not progressing in terms of human rights because Singapore indirectly tried to influence the discourse. Because human rights and democracy is not good for the government because the government will collapse. In fact, the elections are 1 month ahead. I mean, in a month, the elections will be called. This is the first time that opposition is fielding all seats and fighting.
Oh, first time?
Yeah, first time.
Oh, I'm pretty excited about it. I'm on kill PAP.
I never imagined that.
Of course, even in Hong Kong, we cannot send all opposing candidates to all constituencies.
Yeah.
It's
yes.
It's pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
So, just before our second break, how's your days in Hong Kong or your journey? What is your itinerary of the next conference on media of that? Just briefly to tell.
We're honored to have Mr. Ravi on Monday at FCC 10 a.m. The press conference about our annual DP report, and we're having another person very honorably from Taiwan, who is a chairperson from an NGO which advocates to abolish DP in Taiwan. We will release the report and we hopefully push this issue to a public standard to talk about it.
And then in the afternoon and in the evening, there's 2 seminars as well.
Right. There's one in CTU, I believe, in university, and another one in our April office, in our regional office. There's another one, and we have sent out invitations and on Facebook, and hopefully you can come.
Yeah, you guys can check it out on the Amnesty International Hong Kong's homepage as well. And at that time, just thank you, Ravi and London's here to talk about this case for you. So I'll see you on Monday.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.
So we just gotta take a break for 5 minutes as well, and we will show you the Steve Crawshaw, the International Advocacy Director of Amnesty International's interviewed by me. Okay, so see you again. In general, how internet and social media change the landscape, or actually the play for protesters or ordinary citizens against opposing regimes in general?
I guess there's two things. On the one hand, the nature of protest remains very much the same. In other words, when people see injustice, they feel impelled to protest against it. And that's the same what I witnessed as a journalist, for example, in Eastern Europe 20 years ago, or in the protests that we have seen, for example, across North Africa, in Tunisia, Egypt in recent weeks and months. But technology has also changed things dramatically in being able to make it easier for people to communicate quickly with each other and also to communicate with the outside world. So it was much easier to suppress news of what was happening before an era of mobile phones. Now, of course, in places all around the world where there were no television cameras, but somebody who has their mobile phone can take pictures of that. Those pictures can be seen around the world, and that can create new pressures. So I think there's no question that the new possibilities of the internet, of video, of Facebook, all of these different things give us new opportunities. It is also true that fundamentally protest is protest and injustice is injustice, and that, to be honest, has partly stayed the same.
During all the social media hype, CNET says, don't forget, the real power behind a revolution is the people. Communication is important, but we must remember what lies behind communication, people. This revolution seems determined to get around whatever roadblocks the government instates. Twitter and Facebook and the internet are fun and useful, but this is a revolution fueled by people, not technology.
Like a New York political analyst, actually I forgot his or her name, has written an article called Why Revolution Cannot Be Tweeted. I don't know whether you have like...
Right.
Yeah. But 2 months later, we've seen like Libya or like Cairo, that kind of like regions have going to like uprising movement. Do you think it would happen in somewhere else, which right now having an opposing regime in like near the future?
Yeah. I think it's been a slightly false debate sometimes, to be honest, because one of the arguments made was, well, civil rights protest in the United States back in the 50s and 60s, that was real protest because they were doing it without mobile phones, without anything. They just risked being beaten, risked being arrested, risked their lives. And somehow Facebook or Twitter was seen as being another kind that was just a bunch of comfortable students sitting in their university dorms. Now, there may be some of that, and actually that also has its role to play. But what we saw, especially, for example, in Tunisia and Egypt in recent weeks and months, was the incredibly important part, to the extent that Facebook started being painted up on the walls, and one of the key heroes of the Egyptian revolution became Wael Ghonim, who worked for Google and who'd set up a Facebook page, and that became the way of communicating. So I think it's not a matter of now we've got new technology, everything's different. It's not. Many things are still the same. But it would also be crazy to suggest that nothing has changed, that Facebook is somehow relevant. Some of the pieces that were written 4, 5, 6 months ago saying Facebook was all just a kind of a bit of an irrelevance, really, to protest, I think it would be very difficult to make that argument now in the wake of what we saw in Tunis and in Cairo.
嚟集會嘅市民喺點幾鐘陸續抵達，到下晝大約1點9，公安突然出動拉人，帶走2名並冇手持茉莉花嘅市民，將佢哋帶上警車。公安企圖阻止記者拍攝。
General situation about like the mode of direct action or whatever, like resistance. Actually, in China, some scholars would say the NGNO, the form of non-governmental, non-organization form of like resistance, like walking around on the streets, would be a new mode to oppose those oppressing regimes. But at the same time, people would question whether it would actually work and putting pressure to the government. What, like, if yes or no, and if not, or if yes, how would it make a difference?
Right. I think there are very, very many different ways of protesting and creating change. One of the things that John Jackson and I tried to do in our book Small Acts of Resistance is to show how many different ways there are of putting on pressure and of creating change. Many of them have in common that they actually create great risks for the individual involved. So this is by no means a how you should do things kind of book. It's more a book of describing of admiration of the risks that people have taken. Extremely interesting to me is to have seen in recent weeks the non-protests, as it were, in Chinese cities where people just go for a walk without slogans. it must be said that's not actually completely new. So in the book, for example, we describe an event from Poland 30 years ago under martial law, tanks on the streets, where people did exactly the same. They protested without any slogans, but people knew that if they went out at a certain time of day, that was the protest. The police didn't know who to arrest. So it's a kind of that sense of ingeniousness. I think it repeats, it develops through different forms of ingeniousness that we see around the world.
Recently, the Premier Wen Jiabao has released the figures of their public security expenses as first time exceeding their military expenses. So, in a nation or in a state that police brutality or the so-called power has been dedicated by the makes the authority to do whatever they want to oppose, to oppress, like these protesters or those are not obeyed to the government. How to tackle this if to make sure, imagine if you're talking or trying to persuade or advocate an ordinary citizens who are facing this situation.
Yeah. The figures, as you say, are very striking. I guess seeing what we are seeing in China today, perhaps it's not surprising that the public security budget is so immense, because we see it intruding into people's daily lives again and again and again. And not just intruding into their lives. We've seen a great upsurge of arrests in recent weeks of those who put their head above the parapet, and that clearly needs to end. I think the fact of acknowledging quite how high those costs are, one would like to think that should become a wake-up moment that for no government can it make sense that you spend such an enormous amount in policing your own citizens and basically preventing them from being able to live ordinary lives, to speak the truth in the way that they should be able to communicate with each other as they would be able to, and simply to live ordinary lives. That's something that simply shouldn't happen. It needs to end. And I think the fact that we've got the figures merely tells us something we already know, but it does need to change.
好，翻到嚟第三節嘅政事協商會議，我哋用翻廣東話去傾談嘅。
係啦，同埋你見到我哋啲燈係突然間黑咗嘅，絕對唔係因為 OurTV 停電，或者因為頭先嘅言論太過激烈，俾人 cut 電。
唔會嘅，李光耀唔會嚟到啦，係咪先嚇？所以我都諗下，我遲啲去唔去新加坡好啊？應該都
小心啲啊！
你入我就頭先好 fierce 啊！我幾時都咁 fierce 㗎啦，係咪先？小心啲啊！我小心啲都算啦，喺香港都俾人 charge 㗎啦，係咪先？去新加坡仲衰 death penalty， 或者告到你賴 bail 之後再 bankrupt。係啊，最中意就係令到你破產。咪所以我好奇怪，佢竟然有齊咁多人可以一齊去選呢一個嚟緊嘅選舉咧，即係佢應該已經令到嗰堆人已經破晒產嘅，我成日都以為。佢其實係一開始去 bring up 呢個選舉嘅時候咧，都已經係定到好多 figure 破產嘅。係咯。咁但係今次係可以全部人去 compete， 竟然勁啊！真係嗱，之前佢有其實咁嘅，佢同澳門嘅情況差唔多嘅。係澳門你諗下，一開始原本得邊個嘅啫嘛，伍國昌嘅啫嘛，係咯。咁之後多咗一個啊嘛，係啦。咁啊，依家新加坡咧就0個變1個啦。咁睇下遲啲會唔會多一個啦？但係新加坡好奇怪嘅喎，你知啦，佢可以佢可以係選舉前21日先 call for 選舉嘅，幾好啊！即係你有21日時間 run campaign， 幾犀利啊都話。你可唔可以21日時間 run 你個？我而家咪日日 run campaign， 係啊 ，every day is election day 啊嘛。係咁，所以呢個係 Bill Clinton 講啊。係咁，所以即係喺新加坡好慘嘅， 所以我唔明點解啲人話，即係講當年咧89年話咧移民去新加坡嗰啲咧，
有人咁樣講啊，原來咁有見地，
咪有樓咯 ，OK 大樓
，OK 咯，
咁之後幫星展銀行打工咯，
啲地方乾淨咯，靜英英啦，唔俾照香口膠，但係
同埋我覺得去新加坡好慘㗎，你有冇發覺咧？你有冇去過先？
有去過一次細個。
你有冇發覺喺地鐵咧，新加坡嘅 MRT 裏邊咧係冇人喺度嘴同親熱嘅，
令到人少咗一啲欣賞嘅東西係嘛？
唔係話欣唔欣賞啊？反而有人食嘢，都還好，都有人去 challenge 呢個呢個 law，即係但係你會發覺好
咁保守嘅咧，
唔係啊，好 dry 啊個城市，你有冇發覺啊？之後咧，你喺度嘴嘅時間咧，即係個全車人都知道咧，You are not a Singaporean 啊，即係好 dry 咯，我覺得好即係
好唔適合你嘅，
好 dry，即係嗰 dreadful，簡直係完全係唔係人住嘅咯，係咯，
死城啦，總之就係冇生氣嘅，
冇生，唔係啲人都冇咗自己咯，係咯，咁所以就
即管移民去新加坡啦，
或者即唔係㗎，依家曾蔭權成日話咩要學新加坡乜乜柒柒㗎嘛。係咯，唐英年又話新加坡乜乜柒柒㗎嘛，我哋要同新加坡鬥低利得稅啊嘛，
係啊，
咁難交嘅，
係啊，
係咯，咁所以就唔知點啦。
不過同大家解釋翻點解熄燈先啦，喂。
係啦，咁今日其實係地球1小時啦，
冇錯。
係啦，咁但係我哋熄燈咧係冇用嘅 ，OK， 話俾大家聽冇用嘅。點解冇用咧？
點解冇用咧？
嗱，因為
前面都仲開緊燈嘅。
唔係，我哋志在慳電 ，OK， 30分鐘最多。咁但係咧，如果大家有睇呢個電影節咧，其實咧有一套片好正嘅，叫《Cool It》冷眼真相。咁啱啱上映咗一次啫。如果你有睇嘅話，即係同我同一場睇戲㗎。係啦。
如果未睇嘅就28號有一場。係
啦，星期一咁樣，我唔知你睇唔睇啦。射唔射到啊？
射唔到。
哦，so sad。唔緊要，29號開始喺 App Store 有得 download。
OK。
係唔知11.99。jailbreak 咗佢啦，
好慘
jailbreak 咗佢，係啦 JB 咗佢咁啊，J 咗佢咁啊冇問題，available of App Store 咁樣。咁咧呢套嘢咧就好正啊，就係話俾你聽咧，地球1小時其實係唔會令大家慳到電，
特別係大家好中意有情調嘅時候，
唔會救到地球啊？點解？因為你會點蠟燭㗎。點蠟燭嘅時間咧，你係排放緊相對於一個慳電膽2倍嘅二氧化碳。係啦，咁咧今日好好笑啊！今日個新聞咧，即係蘋果嘅新聞就話啦，日皇，係啦，就話我哋熄燈有情調，我哋用蠟燭，去食飯。咁我心諗，你玩嘢啊？你係咪玩嘢啊？
但係有好多人都係咁樣諗嘅喎，即係喂咁話，咁熄咗燈咁咪點蠟燭咯，係咁噶啦。
黐線啊！你知唔知？
好多人都咁諗嘅喎。你
知唔知啲蠟其實係咩嚟㗎？嗰啲
蠟係啲咩嚟㗎？
佢其實係石油副產品嚟㗎嘛，佢其實係 wax 嚟㗎嘛，咁嗰啲嘢其實係好重嘅碳氫化合物嚟嘅，即係勁過石油氣啦，嗰啲咁嘅嘢，即係好多個碳鏈咁樣啦，咁先至變到固體㗎嘛。燒嗰啲係產生好多二氧化碳嘅，CO2你諗下 C 啊嘛，咁多個 carbon 喎，燒幾多 CO2 出嚟啊？係咪先？所以即係我唔明咯，所以我哋熄燈都係
我覺得係香港人嘅一啲問題嚟嘅，即係成日大家成日有感覺就係，即係正如上個禮拜講，你去完呢個 S 北飲完杯咖啡就感覺自己做咗善事，跟住你熄咗一個鐘燈，然之後我感覺自己做一個環保鬥士咁樣，係咁樣喎，即係我覺得香港人。所
以咧，即係嗰套 Cool It 咧都講咗啊，其實點即係要你咁樣做咧，其實係 scare your pants off。係啦，scare your pants off 咧，令到你咧唔去dig deep去知道個真相，或者真係去睇啲 data 同個資料咯。咁啊，令到你繼續處於喺呢個咁嘅狀態之中，咁知唔知可以做咩？
咁啊，令到你麻痹啊！
麻痹之餘咧，你都買多啲 energy saving product 啦，亦都可能諗其他 option 係即係有啲商業嘅 option 係 OK 啦。咁咧好搞笑嘅，咁咧嗰個咁嘅主持咧就即係嗰個戲嘅 docu 嘅主角咧，就同呢個戈爾咧完全係打交嘅，
兩邊唔同嘅説法嚟嘅。
係啦，咁咧佢就話咧用呢個2500億美金咧就可以搞掂呢個氣候變化問題啦，抵玩啦！
係咪真係得啊？
咩啊？
係咪真係得？
我覺得真係得嘅喎，即係我完全係覺得點解呢班咁嘅即係地球鬥士友咧， 有陣時真係硬硬地交。OK， 嗱，你諗下啦，如果我哋真係跟京都協定書咁樣去做咧，其實係冇用嘅，因為佢只會喺我哋世紀末嘅時間咧，係令到我哋減咗0.05度嘅啫。Fahrenheit 喎。OK，之後如果我哋全球用晒 Toyota 嘅 Prius， 都係減少0.5% 嘅溫室氣體排放嘅啫。但係你同時間仲有20幾億人口出緊嚟嘅喎，依家60億啦，遲啲2050預計係80億㗎嘛。咁你點樣搞啊？每個人都有碳排放嘅喎，你呼吸都有啦。咁所以又好啦，低能嘅。OK， 唉，我唔明點解即係
咁，但係佢2500億係點樣做咧？咩啊？佢2500億
2500億點樣做啊？包括有一個好正嘅 technology， 你 share 咗嗰條片啦。係啊，將水分解成為氫氣同氧氣。係啊，
即係一個人工化嘅
光合作用
photosynthesis 係啦。
係啦，去 break 嗰個咁嘅HO bonding。
係，其實我係睇唔明嘅，不過大概知道。
唔係
但係我淨係知道佢用一個好簡單嘅一啲科學方法，唔係好簡單，應該係有一啲好簡單嘅大家嘅理論上面嘅東西，然之後咧就做一啲好複雜嘅嘢。咁但係總之咧，佢就可以 break 到某一啲嘅化學物品出嚟咧。咁嗰啲化學物品咧就可以儲到電啊咁之類嗰啲嘢啦。
其實依家咧都有啲叫 hydrogen fuel cell 嘅嘢嘅，咁都做緊呢一樣嘢嘅咁樣。咁但係個 efficiency 當然啦，唔係由 sunlight 嗰度去攞啦，係由一架車嘅 motor power 動能咁樣變翻個電能嘅。
但係嗰個 technology 如果佢真係得嘅話咧，咁就真係好巴閉噶嘛！即係佢話一樽水細樽，即係750毫升嗰啲，大家平時用開嗰啲，咁就已經可以 power 到一間屋成日以上噶啦嘛。係啊，2公升可以玩到好耐噶啦。係啊，咁但係知唔知點？嗱，兼且污糟水啊，係啊，污糟水都得，污糟水仲要咁樣搞完之後咧，出嚟之後咧係 H2O， 係啊，乾淨晒，乾淨到冇朋友。睇下你敢唔敢飲嘅啫。係石原慎太郎都飲啦，飲係咪先？冇乜所謂嘅。咁但係即係點解唔掂咧？咁樣2個原因，一。你係咪石油化工人士一定會阻止你啦？咪係咯，呢啲咁嘅中石油、中石化、中海油，之後 Exxon Mobil 係啊，仲有個咩而家 BP 光匯啊，成日賣廣告。係啦，BP 光匯即係咩啊？Texaco 呢一個 Gulf 係啦，全部都會懟你先啦。哇，大佬嗰條咁嘅生產鏈養活幾多人啊？你要咁樣 block out 佢哋都死啊！第二。如果你咁樣嘅時候，你會唔會將水私有化啊？嗱，water as commodity 好難嘅喎，係嘛？海水周圍都有喎。我將海水私有化，你偷海水犯法。啊，咁啊揦嘢啊！偷海水都犯法啊？係啊，同嗰陣時唔覺意飲錯咗咁咪揦嘢咯。去游水嘅時候。係啊，唔俾游水咁啊！全部喺海度屙尿係犯法，因為你污染咗佢私人財產。冇錯啦，咁你又揦嘢啦。唉，真係凄涼。即係呢個 comment 好正嘅，即係當我係睇到嘅嗰條片咧，即係嗰個教授咧介紹將呢個水分解之後可以產生能源之後咧，有個 comment 就話 The government will just privatize water。OK 啊，你明唔明啊？係，所以咧即係喺呢個資本主義底下都係搞唔掂㗎嘛。不過我估其實嗱，我咁樣睇嘅，因為 privatize water 咧，佢嗰個 cost 應該大過佢 privatize 嗰啲 coal oil 啊嗰啲之類啊，咁所以點都好啲嘅。唔係個 maintenance 個 cost 大啫，咁 law enforcement 佢可以整條 black and white 搞你咪算數啦。只不過 law enforcement 個 cost 冇咁容易做㗎嘛。係啦，即係而家都好多人抽海水去養海鮮啦，都係犯法㗎。同埋你做唔到啊！仲有第二個方法㗎。就係咧，將啲二氧化碳咧懟落去呢啲algae 啊海藻度。你知海藻吸二氧化碳為生㗎嘛？所有綠色嘅生物 ，OK， 綠色嘅植物都係㗎嘛，好多啦，絕大部分唔係個樣啦，吸二氧化碳為生㗎嘛。咁不如整一個人造嘅 algae 嘅地方，即係全部養海藻嘅地方，咪等佢哋吸啲二氧化碳。知唔知需要大概幾大啊？幾大啊？差唔多係一個華盛頓州，又或者半個賓夕法尼亞州。準確啲半個賓夕法尼亞州。但係佢點樣？即係佢全球冇理由淨得一個地方㗎，都要分散㗎嘛？唔係，即係話俾你聽啊，個 size 啊，只要半個
嘅賓夕法尼亞州嘅面積嘅海藻，就已經可以同你搞掂晒啲1年之內有可能同你搞掂晒啲二氧化碳去。係咯，搞錯
係咪啊？
係啊，佢話咁得咯 ，OK 咯。咁仲有好多方法嘅，即係
exciting 呢一個。喂，唔係即係我覺得個問題就係講到咁簡單咧，就更加難相信。即係呢一個。即係大家平時講我哋啲氣候變化啊、溫室氣體啊、二氧化碳排放啊，好差勁啊，好難搞啊！先睇我哋香港政府更加唔想掂，掂都未掂過咁滯啦。又要家居廢物啊、乜物啊，咁就搞嚟搞去。咁佢咁樣講，成係一個半個賓夕法尼亞州嘅地方，就可以將全球1年嘅二氧化碳處理晒，好似比較簡單得令人難以相信。
唔係咁，你要明白呢個世界仲有 efficiency 嗰個問題嘅，
就好似益力多啲廣告咁。
唔係你如果 assume 個 throughput 係100% 嘅，咁冇嘢講啊，係咪先？咁唔係100% 嘅，咁就即係所以要有其他方法咯，咁樣。咁啊，另外呢套戲咧，我覺得 inspiring 就係咧，即係推歐晒好多咧 scare your pants off 嘅 myth 啊。即係咧，唔做就會好多風㗎啦，唔做就會 Katrina 㗎啦，唔做就會好似日本海嘯㗎，即係呢啲咁嘅，即係用啲天然災害咧，佢話氣候變化好勁，咁樣所以就賴嘢。咁其實諗深一層，佢又提到啲 point 咧，就真係好正嘅。佢話啊嘛，如果我哋再唔搞呢個氣候變化嘅時間咧，就會海水上升到浸晒香港啊、上海成啊嘛。咁但係咧，佢又話啦
Roadshow 都話地球16度啊。
嗱，佢又話咩咧？其實咧睇翻 history 啊，喺我哋上個世紀咧，其實我哋海水咧係上升咗30厘米。一個世紀裏邊30厘米，你感受到50年30厘米 ，OK， 一個 century 30厘米，咁嚟緊我哋都會升30厘米。一個世紀裏邊，咁多，你明唔明啊？即係佢如果佢個 forecast 係準嘅話咧，咁。即係會唔會用晒啊？30厘米，大佬你海嘯都唔止啊！第一件事啊，第二件事就係咧，佢攞翻咧Katrina 嗰陣時咧就話因為氣候變化咁，所以咧就啲風越嚟越勁，成咁，所以咧就冧鳩晒啦，成個新奧爾良。但係其實新奧爾良水浸係因為佢起喺水平線下邊啦，同埋佢個 dam 冇錢去維修啊嘛。咁之後就話個 dam 設計有問題。之後就炒咗個工程師，但係個設計總工程師咧一早已經 propose 過，喂一定要加高，但係炒咗佢咯。咁即係呢啲咁嘅人為災禍其實係可以避免㗎嘛。即係日本嗰啲冇得講啊，你明唔明啊？你點預啫？
海嘯就係
斷裂性咁海嘯，人哋都起咗個12米高嘅都過20米咁樣，8米高你咁冇得講啦，係咪先？即係呢啲唔怕一萬，只怕萬一嘅，幾時都有嘅。咁但係即係叫大家即係唔好用 scare your pants off 呢個角度，即係我一定要 green go green。因為呢個咁嘅 perception 咧，其實咧有陣時咧係令到你更加驚啊，同埋更加做一啲咧更低能嘅行為嘅。而呢啲咁嘅低能嘅行為咧，有陣時咧係冇辦法補救嘅。覺唔覺？譬如話即係慳電膽有咩問題？
慳電膽有乜問題啊？有乜問題啊？不如你講下。
水銀啊嘛，水銀你抌落 landfill， 咪又係
landfill 好啊，
咪又係污染，咪又係污染地質，污染啲地質又污染啲地下水，咁啲地下水又係要 purify 過，即係你又係嘥錢、嘥資源同嘥時間啊嘛，到最尾又係 tragedy of commons。然
之後你又感覺自己又好似有一個環保鬥士咯。再一次感覺自己好環保啊！咁但係實際上就破壞緊另外一啲嘅生態系統。係
咯，同埋依家喺生產嘅模式嗰方面咧，你做一啲 energy sink products 咧，又或者係全球化，你用好多唔係本地或者附近生產嘅嘢嘛，
全部都有呢一個限嘅足跡㗎嘛，係嘛？
係啊，全部都有 carbon footprint 㗎嘛，即係 我用緊，即係我依家着緊一件危地馬拉嘅底衫嘅屋企啊。
係啊，咁你呢個危地馬拉嘅底衫咧，就要由危地馬拉運去某個地方，咁嗰度咧就有啲飛機程嘅。係啦，咁喺飛機程裏邊就會碳排放啦，係嘛？
唔係咯，嗰個危地馬拉佢運到去New York 啦，咁之後我 New York 又搭翻飛機嚟香港啦，咁之後有陣時成日帶佢周圍去啦。係啊，
所以你件衫嘅碳排放係好高嘅。
咪係咯，即係
再燒埋佢就，
即係燒埋佢咁勁咁樣，即係呢？但係有陣時候要諗啦，碳排放又好 carbon trade 又好，其實係一個 myth，又或者其實係一個 corruption 嘅一個 concept 嚟噶嘛。因為佢發現咗原來我哋中國人真係好撲街嘅，唔係中國人係共產黨。唔好意思，更正，學陳雲話齋，共產黨係點撲街法咧？咁樣嗱，你都知道咧，呢個全球有一個碳排放交易市場噶嘛，係即係佢為每一個工廠去 set 一個 limit 噶嘛，咁咧。
你可以透過呢個交易市場就買人哋嘅碳排放量啊嘛。係啊，
看似好好啦，但係咧中國咧
共產黨
呢啲共產黨旗下嗰啲乜乜市人民政府咧，就竟然咧容許咧人哋係將 CFC 咧作為呢個交易嘅喎。但係人哋個碳排放市場 suppose 係排 CO2 啫，唔係 CFC 喎。你知咧 CFC 同埋呢一個 CO2 邊個揦嘢啲㗎啦，大佬啊！但係你竟然可以用碳排放買人哋買外國嘅 CO2 quota 之後，令到你自己排 CFC。而呢樣嘢係即係聯合國係知嘅。但係買你中國牌，唔係買你共產黨牌。咁你話啊，即係我哋嘅神州大地偉大祖國，
我喺度諗緊都好大鑊嘅喎，其實可以。係啊，即係對於成個中國裏邊嗰啲嘅空氣啊，成個溫室氣體嘅積聚啊，其實係可以好嚴重。即係你本身買碳排放呢樣嘢，你買多咗翻嚟，已經令到你個區裏邊嗰啲溫室氣體積聚已經多咗㗎啦。係啊，咁仲要排嘅唔係 CO2。嘅時候，
仲有你依家 Kyoto Protocol 係廢㗎嘛？係啊，第一啦，第二你係令唔到人哋發展中國家係真係為咗佢哋個即係唔犧牲佢哋嘅經濟發展個速度，而令你減排啊嘛，係咪先？
咪同埋最重要都係，我覺得即係成個京都議定書、協定書，唔記得中文咩？我覺得最大嗰個。我會覺得幾搞笑嘅地方咧，就係講完咁多年之後咧，到而家都係大家都係簽咗咯，咁但係冚唪唥都冇人做到噶咯，係啊，即係我就算我當佢有用都好，都係冇人做到咯，所有國家都冇人做到。
因為如果因為嗰條片就話嘅，如果你以現行嘅方法去做咧，用翻京都議定書方法去做咧，我哋咧一年啦計下一個國家，譬如話 let's say 可能係 United States 咁樣咧，就要損失 GDP 120 billion US dollars，
即係1200億美金。
係啦，即係等於聯儲局每年要印銀紙㗎啦。咁但係咧，只係令到但係咁樣做50年咧，先至減到0.05 Fahrenheit 啫。你會唔會願意犧牲咁多嘅 GDP 而去為咗減嗰0.05 Fahrenheit 咯？即係計條數你唔值㗎嘛？你明唔明啊？點解你唔去投資一啲可以令到呢個地球嘅即係可以搞掂咗啲二氧化碳，又或者即係令到其他嘢嘅二氧化碳少啲嘅項目咧？咁啊唔知。
原來1200億美金嘅話咧，1200億美金嘅話咧，我絕對相信咧可以做足夠香港所有供電嘅可再生能源嘅。
係咁，但係人哋嗰條友話嘛，用2500億就美金喎，一鋪過就可以搞掂全球嘅氣候變化問題。其實最主要關鍵都係啦 ，invest 即係 invest 喺 scientific research 嘅啫。即係好多咧，依家咧發覺咧好多 research 都係自己俾錢嘅，包括你嗰個水
MIT 嗰個
係 MIT 嗰個教授啦，自己俾錢啦 ，LG 又係自己俾錢啦，即係好多呢啲咁嘅即係非 L 哥主流，自己俾錢嘅，係咯，即係可以好明顯睇到咧，其實咧即係 邊啲人喺度操縱緊邊啲嘢啦。
不過我哋都要再一次強調，即係大家平時教，即係你睇好多節目教你哋嗰啲咩啲燈唔啱用就要唔使用就刪咗佢嗰啲都繼續可以要做嘅。
嗰啲
即係嗰啲當然要做嘅，即係唔好讓我哋喺度講完之後就將自己係啊唔使做啊冇撚用嘅呢一個刪燈1小時咁就平時都唔刪燈嗰度千祈唔好啊！我覺得呢一個咧就一個唔好嘅 practice 嚟嘅。如果
唔係，即係我又要諗，我又要反嚟計一條數，我哋用喺地球1小時 promotion 嘅 product， 所用嘅碳排放，相對於我哋熄燈1個鐘，咁爭幾遠咧？你諗下啦，嗱，我哋用咗好多個燈箱啦，港鐵好多個燈箱啦，係咪先？又印好多 poster 啦，係咯。咁你擺 server 廣告噶嘛？你 server 又要 server time 啦，係咪先？計我條數其實。
我唔知啊，我唔知佢有幾多宣傳啦。咁但係嗱，我覺得我會覺得即係地球1小時呢啲咩活動搞下無妨嘅，即係講真，即係但係唔好搞到啲人感覺到自己做完1個鐘之後，其他平時嘅時間就
繼續點蠟燭啦。係
啊，繼續點蠟燭，繼續平時唔閂燈，平時啲水繼續用咁，即係呢啲咁樣嘅嘢就一定係令到成個地球個資源上面咧就一定係用多咗嘅，係個能源上一定用多咗嘅。
係啦，咁所以咧即係。大家如果有興趣睇呢套片咧，都係講多一次啊！3月28號咁就喺呢個科學館有得睇。係啊，
不過大家訂飛就要去呢一個城市電腦售票網啦。
冇錯，或者上 City Line 裏邊嘅 OurTV 啊咁樣。咁如果唔等即係去唔到嘅，咁冇乜所謂。如果你聽到全英文，其實去睇嗰套戲都係全英文嘅啦。OK， 3月29號開始，咁就喺 Apple 嘅 App Store 咧就有得 download 嘅。
OK，大家可以
jailbreak 咗先，咁完全冇問題。好啦，臨走之前都要講一講啊，聽日有活動喎。
聽日有活動啊。
係啊，叫327還我香港未來預算案清算大遊行啊！咁呢個遊行咧就
呢個爭取合理財富再分配聯席去搞㗎係嘛？
係啦，咁咧就我哋會喺呢一個大會堂對出嘅舊皇后碼頭遺址嗰度咧就開始行啦。咁我哋會行到邊咧？先行去 IFC，
跟住就係盈智大廈，
即係積金局
嗰個地方嚟嘅。
係啦。之後咧就再去新世界，然
之後長江中心啦，
係啦，之後翻去立法會嘅咁樣。OK， 所以咧各位東區重案組第2隊嘅朋友唔使驚，
如果你仲聽緊嘅話，
係唔使驚。OK， 即係翻去立法會嘅啫。咁夜晚8點咧就有呢一個各大嘅泛民政黨為日本加油打氣嘅聚會，所以咧。你3點完咗之後咧，如果你告我哋非法集結嘅話咧，
到8點鐘我哋就合法㗎啦。我哋有申請㗎啦，就變咗係。
即係
唔好搞我哋。
啲3至8，如果你都搞，真係冇嘢好講啊！你
冇錯，
係啦，真係千祈唔好搞啊！馬 Sir，尤其是你阿馬 Sir， 真係好啦。今集政事協商會議去到呢度啊，星期日即係聽日啦，街頭見，下個星期再見，
拜拜。